So, I mean, I guess so. Here's my question. PowerPoints. So I guess I was a little confused about how we were going to peer review our presentations. Like, should I include a more detailed speaker notes about exactly what I'm going to say, or am I actually going to be presenting for somebody else? Um, I guess that's a quick question I had for you.
Um, I think, yeah, see, I agree with what you said. I mean, that's typically what I always tell students too, right? I mean, um, my, my style, and I think the best style for PowerPoints is to minimize the text. And what I tell students in general is that actually the text on the PowerPoint slides is as much for the presenter as it is for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little bit different now to some degree presenting things on Zoom, but like you typically present something in a classroom or at a conference and you're facing the audience and and the slides are in back of you. And so sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can't, but you know, part of being a good speaker is actually looking at your audience part of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I always say is like, you want the most important concepts, points of the slide somehow on the slide, even if it's only one or two words. And the audience, the words don't necessarily have to make perfect sense to the audience out of the context of what you're saying. But it's like it's a reminder to you that, yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned these three things on the slide. And you know, one of the most difficult things that can happen in a presentation is you get to a certain point and you forget what you were going to say. And I mean, I've known people who like would write out their whole presentation verbatim for a 15-20 minute presentation and basically memorize it. And I just, to me, I don't have a great memory for stuff like that. And so that's never worked for me. And to me, the problem is when you memorize something like that, if it's pretty long, if you forget something, you're screwed, because then it's like, you know, it can really impact you, because then like you forgot where you were, but you had it all memorized, but now you can't remember it, and then it just kind of snowballs. So for me, you know, a lot of times for slides, I have just minimal amounts of text on them. And the text does make sense, hopefully, as I'm talking through the slide. But a lot of it's just for me to make sure that I don't forget to say these things that I want to say. So, you know, what the peer review is about is you guys going through your presentations with each other and talking through them, right? I mean, your presentation is going to be maybe 10 minutes roughly when you give it in class. If you practiced and things like that, it'll probably take you 25-30 minutes to talk through it. And the idea with the peer review basically is you'll talk through it. But let me, I want to wait, because this is probably something that's good for everyone to hear. I've got this on the recording, but this is probably a question that the answer would be good for several people to hear. So I don't want to.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no. Great question. I wasn't sure if people had concerns about this or not. So you put me on track to talk about this.
Good.
So it's perfect. Morning, Isabel. How you doing?
I'm all right. How about you?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Busy week, but gonna be a little stressful. But that's okay. We'll get through it. We will get through it. Hey, Jackie, how you doing? You doing okay, Jackie? Yes? No? Hopefully. Odin, how you doing? Very good. Danielle, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Did you
Okay.
say me, Professor?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Jackie.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Okay. You doing okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And Danielle, you're doing okay? Toby, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Where are you these days?
Back home in Connecticut now.
Okay.
For good. So my traveling is done.
Okay. That's probably good.
Yeah, I think so, especially towards the end of the semester with all the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you guys, is everyone feeling okay with the workload? At least in my class, I can't do anything in my other classes, but I was having a little bit of problems with the reading, so I just decided to heck with it. You guys could probably use a break anyway. So I will get the reading up at some point, but I'll sort of rely a little bit more on the PowerPoint this week to convey some information to you. The reading this week is about, it kind of gets back to soil chemistry a little bit, but more from the perspective of how you change soil chemistry. So the last couple of weeks, we are going to kind of, unless we decide to change, we're going to kind of focus on things that are a little bit more applied now, with soil chemistry and things you do to soil chemistry, and why it's useful from a plant perspective to monitor soil chemistry and some ways to change it. I think next week we have erosion, and the last week we kind of have general environmental problems. But to me, as far as like marking stuff goes, the project is really going to be an important thing for you guys to finish up well. And so I don't want to be giving you too many things these last couple of weeks to distract you. I may have a few small assignments, but I'll try to make most of them in class or relatively short, because I want you to have this time to focus on your projects. I know you're gonna have a lot of other stuff going on. And just remember, like, if you've got questions, you've got to communicate with me. I'm happy this week, next week, the week after, to get on Zoom with you outside of class times to help you through issues with your project. Okay, but don't delay. Better to do it sooner rather than later, because it'll reduce everyone's stress, including mine. Okay, so Sammy had a great question at the very beginning. He was asking about how these peer reviews of your presentations are going to go this week in lab, and because and his question was also included the idea that typically in PowerPoints, rarely do you want to have a lot of words. Sometimes you might have a slide that's kind of an overview, like a roadmap, which is always a good thing to have. Sometimes you might have conclusions, or you might have summaries partway through a presentation that are mostly sort of lines of text. But remember, you always want text to be big. Like in PowerPoint, it should be like size 24 font at least, if not bigger. And you really want to minimize text. And what I was talking with about Sammy is kind of my philosophy about PowerPoint and presentations. Like, I remember back in the old days when you gave a presentation, you either had like those overhead little plastic film things, which were a pain, because you put them in a copy machine and half the time they'd melt and get stuck and you'd have to rip them out and do it again. Or we actually used cameras that had film in them, and you had to take a slide, like literally a slide of your diagram or whatever, and half the time, it was a pain. And so this world it makes presentations a whole lot easier than the old days, and also means, with the slides, like, you had to figure, you needed a day after you were totally done, because you had to actually take the film to like a processing place, and they actually made film that you could process in one day. It was expensive. So it's the good and the bad of the modern era. You don't have to go through that stage, so you can be working on things a little bit closer to the timeline there, although it's still best not to. But the idea with the slides were that you want to minimize text. And in many ways, the way I view the text I put on my slides, that text is almost more for me than it is for my audience. Like, it's a prompt for me, because if I've got a long presentation and I have slides where I want to make 2 or 3 important points, I don't want to sit there and look at the slide and be trying to think, I know there's one more thing, but I don't know what it is, because that sort of disrupts the process. So a lot of times, and I try to model that in the slides I use in class. I'll have bulleted lists, but sometimes I only have 1 or 2 words there. And it doesn't really matter if my audience sees the slide and they don't necessarily understand the significance of those words until they hear me talk. Right? Because the other thing is, if you put a slide up that's got all kinds of words, the tendency of the audience is to stop listening to you and try to read the text. And so if you have short phrases, even if they're reading the text, they'll say, aluminum is toxic. Well, I don't know what that means. So I got to listen to the presentation to figure out why that's on that slide. Right? So, I mean, it's a way of communication, but to me, you know, like I said, when you're thinking about how you put the text up, a lot of the text is a prompt to you as the presenter to make sure you don't forget something that's important and to help you explain stuff. And so on Wednesdays, you guys are going through your presentations. What I expect, I'm going to pair you all up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's 8 of you. So I'll have you all paired up. And you're, you know, the main part of Wednesday's 3-hour block of time is going to be for you to go with your partner, and you're each going to go through your project presentations with each other. And so it's not necessarily really that you should have it polished and ready to go and you're going to give a 10-minute presentation and that's going to be it and you'll be done. The idea is that you should have your presentations mostly built, but it's to give you someone else who's also doing the same assignment a chance to look through your presentation and make sure you're not missing anything that's obvious, and then you'll repay them by doing the same thing. And so I expect you to take, you know, half hour or so for, you know, with each person, you know, Jackie and Patrick or Danielle and Isabel or however we're partnered up, and kind of talk through your presentation. So you could be talking about ideas. Does this graph work? Do I need another figure here? Do I have too much text? Right? And so your peer hopefully will help you construct this. So when we do these presentations, the last week of classes, we only have 3 weeks of class left. So when you do these presentations last week of class, they're smooth, you feel good, and you kind of have a little bit more confidence because you've talked through it with someone. Patrick?
Yeah, my question relates to like the timing of all this. So in order to do like a practice presentation, I think I talked with you last week some point and you mentioned it kind of relates a lot to what you write in your paper. Do you suggest we just kind of go off what we think we'll be writing in our paper for this kind of pre-presentation work with our teammates? Because I'm writing it, I'm going to start writing it currently, but like I'm just finishing up my like project and I'm going to start writing it currently. Do I just kind of piece together things I think will be on the presentation right now and kind of work with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it is a time to kind of a little bit more generally talk about someone else, talk to someone else who's in a similar position about your project in general. Yeah, so Patrick and I talked about this a little bit in one of our off-class meetings since he can't come on Wednesdays. But I think your presentation, by the time you're done with your presentation, you should certainly have all the graphics and the concepts that are going to be part of your paper. And literally, to some degree, you can take your PowerPoint and you can export all your figures as PNG files or JPEGs, and then you just insert them into your actual paper text at the end of your paper. And I do talk about formatting the paper. We talked a little bit about the MRAD method last week. I don't expect you. To me, you can waste a lot of time trying to insert figures into the text of a Word document, because every time I try to do that, you know, then I type another paragraph and then the figure gets bumped to the wrong page and the space. So typically the way we prepare manuscripts for like submission to a journal, you have all the text for the paper, and then at the end you have the figures, and you put one figure per page and you have a figure caption with it. And that way you don't have to mess around with trying to keep the spacing right, or trying to, you know, make the text wrap around the figure if it's a small figure or whatever. That kind of formatting stuff is, if you want to go into publications, great, but I mean, it's not practically, that's not something that we do yet. I mean, at some point in the future, scientists may be self-publishing all their papers, and then we'll have to spend more time with that kind of organization. But for me, the important thing is content and presentation. And I don't want you to spend time doing silly things in Word just to make it look better, especially because I'm already going to have your PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, sorry, Ben.
Oh, so for my presentation or my project, like I am nowhere in a good state with the growing to like have significant results because my growth isn't significant. So what I'm trying to say is like I'm not gonna be able to like give a full presentation of all my results because I'm not done yet. So I mean I can fit as much as I can in like the intro and like some stuff, but like it's not at all going to be a full like here's the conclusion and like all the results because I'm not done. So
Okay.
I'll just do what I can do, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can work on like your presentations. It's kind of like, you know, again, I think we talked Friday in lab. I can't remember, we talked about the writing stuff, right? But the beauty of a scientific presentation style, like you can say it lacks some creativity, and I would agree somewhat. But the beauty of it is, like, you can make your whole presentation already, and like you got a title slide, you have an overview slide, you've got some introduction, you have your methods, results, etc. You can make those slides already and have headers and have whatever background you want, and make it ready so that you just have to go and type in stuff and add things to it. Yeah, so if you don't have all your results, that's fine. It's important now to talk though, and this will help you when you're talking with your peers about what you're doing, because you may say, okay, I'm going to put 2 graphs here showing this or that and the other thing, and they may say, wow, actually, but it might be interesting to show a picture of this, or maybe it'd be nice to see a graph of that. So part of the advantage of doing the peer review at this earlier stage is that the peer review isn't just looking at a final product and doing sort of minor adjustments. I think there should be enough time doing the peer review sort of 2 weeks before the final thing that you can actually get substantive comments that you can actually use to change the outcome of your presentation, potentially. And yeah, so I realize that you guys are all in different stages, and that's fine. And Ben, you need to send me an email. I'll try to remember sending you an email after class, but I actually have a little bit of data on some of the samples you get me that I'll send back to you today. Yeah. Good thoughts. And I will try to be, like, I'll be on Zoom during lab time as per normal. And I don't know that I will jump. I wasn't planning on putting you in discussion rooms because you guys need to be, showing each other PowerPoints and stuff like that. Although I can do that. I don't know if that would be, I guess I was thinking you guys would do it on your own. But I don't know if it'd be easier. I guess if I put you all in breakout rooms, theoretically, you guys can all share your screens with each other. And so that might be, I mean, can you guys all do Zoom, or can you talk or share screens? Or, I mean, do you have your own ways of doing that without me?
I think we could probably just coordinate our own Zoom meetings if you give us partners.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So I'll just be available during that lab period with Zoom on, sitting here working, doing my stuff. But you guys feel free to pop in during the lab session if you have questions or you want to show me something. Okay. But otherwise, I'll get you guys assigned here after class to partner, so you're partnered up, and then you just arrange with your partner when you're going to do these peer reviews. I will want you to write up probably half a page, maybe in an email, and send it to me. That is your peer review, just so I get a sense of what you talked about. So if Sammy and Patrick are partnered, Patrick will send me a short email saying, hey, Ben, this is what I thought of what Sammy said. These are a couple things I suggested. It's not to burden you, but it's just sort of a check to make sure, for you guys to make sure that you did something, and I get a little bit of sense of what the conversation was like. But that'll be due by next week's lab period, I guess. So as always, you'll kind of have a week to do this. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with what I had a couple things I want to share with you. Maybe I'll start here. I'm just going to do full screen because I did want to quickly show you. I got the my weekly NRCS USDA report on focuses a lot on weather, but there were two sort of interesting things I kind of wanted to point out. There is a lot of snow. There's a lot of the West now that's gotten quite a bit of snow, which is always good. Snow is good for long-term moisture. Although it's always striking to me the ratio of actual rainwater equivalent between snow and water is always sort of striking. So it's, snow has a density that's about a third that of water. So you need, at least sort of 3 inches of snow to make 1 inch of rain. So you actually need quite a bit of snow to offset losing seasonal rain. And that's really important for crops and plants in a lot of ways. So this is just the update for the U.S. Drought Monitor. Gray means that there's been no change in the drought class in the last week. And then the yellow colors mean that an area has gotten drier, and green colors mean that an area has gotten wetter. And so these maps are just kind of interesting to show that, we still have a lot of drought in the western half of the United States. And the 6-month map is pretty telling because, the Pacific Northwest typically is wetter because they're right by the Pacific Ocean. But as soon as you get across the mountains, it starts to get dry, and we get into sort of the massive fire area that we heard about a lot this summer. And then when we get to the southern third of the U.S., this is actually another kind of important thing about weather. Remember, all of this area is green, which means that there's been some drought improvement. And what's the explanation for that broadly? What's happened this year weather-wise that makes sense with the Southeast being getting some drought relief and a lot of rain?
Hurricanes.
Yeah, right. So we've had more. This has been a record year for hurricanes, and there is another hurricane right now as we speak. Although for better or for worse, it looks like this hurricane, it's ETA, ETA is its name, and it looks like it's probably going to hit Central America. So once you get close to the southern part of the Caribbean, hurricane tracks are very sensitive to where the jet stream is. When they're on that track right about level with the Yucatan Peninsula, and typically if it's a little bit south of the Yucatan Peninsula, the hurricanes will actually go across Central America and then out to the Pacific and die, as opposed to swinging up through the Gulf of Mexico and hitting the U.S. So it looks like this last hurricane of the season, even though it may be another major hurricane, is probably going to hit Central America instead of the U.S., which is good for the Southeast U.S., but quite frankly, the Southeast U.S. is oftentimes a little bit better prepared from a structural perspective to deal with hurricanes in Central America. So this could be a pretty significant catastrophe for Honduras and Nicaragua. So hopefully it won't be, but that's problematic. And the reason that our weather is doing these wild and wacky things, I went out for a brisk walk today, and it was in the lower 30s, which definitely seems chilly. But what's going on and what controls a lot of our weather, at least the temperature wise, is the jet stream. And so this is I've taken you to this before, but this is a website called Squall. It's from San Francisco State University, and they show projections of the jet stream. Right, and the jet stream is this river of upper level air that moves quite quickly. And when we get these polar plunges, what happens is the jet stream is actually a barrier to air masses. And the jet stream typically, when it's going across kind of the northern states and Canada, actually forms a barrier to prevent cold Arctic air from moving down to where we are. And you can see when the jet stream dips like that, that basically gives cold Arctic air masses a clear shot to come all the way down to where we are. And as the jet stream reconfigures itself, then we'll warm back up at least somewhat, because the jet stream will relatively quickly probably reform this barrier that protects us from the cold Arctic air drifting down. And of course, when the Arctic cold air drifts down and we say, oh gosh, polar plunge, maybe global warming is not as bad as we think. you need to take a look at the temperatures in the Arctic, because typically when we get the large cold air masses that come down here, that pulls warm air up into the Arctic, and actually they get anomalously warm weather, which continues to impede things like sea ice development, and it does all sorts of bad things for the Earth and our temperature balance.
So what controls where the jet stream goes?
Oh, that may be more complicated than I can explain. Part of the jet stream has to do actually with things called Hadley cells. And if we look at the Earth, there are certain places due to solar radiation where typically we get warm air, and the warm air moves up, and as it moves up, it cools. And at 30 degrees latitude north and 30 degrees latitude south, the warm air moves up, and then it splits apart, and some of it moves to the north and some of it moves to the south. And as it cools, it drops back down again. And so these are called Hadley cells, and then the large scale atmospheric circulation cells. And so that's partly what controls the jet stream, where you have these massive downwellings of cold air versus warm air. But this also has to do with changes in atmospheric pressure that also does have to do with heating and cooling. But yeah, I'm not a meteorologist, so I don't want to get into a land where I got to speculate more about it. But it's related to that, and the jet stream definitely can stabilize, and you know, a lot of times when it stabilizes, that means it's kind of keeping it a relatively uniform latitude, like we see is happening over Siberia and the easternmost part of Russia and Japan in here. But in North America in the winter, a lot of times the jet stream develops these instabilities. And there actually are known sort of areas they call polar lows. There's an Icelandic low that develops pretty frequently in the winter, and that controls the climate around Iceland. There's another persistent low pressure, I think it's low or maybe it's high, that occurs in Alaska. Some of it has to do with how much water, because water absorbs heat differently from land. Water doesn't reflect as much heat as land does. So we have sort of a more complex configuration of sort of land and water in the northern hemisphere, more so to some degree in the southern hemisphere, because there's more continental landmass north of the equator than there is south of the equator right now, right? But that's all controlled by plate tectonics, because the continents are on tectonic plates. But you know, for now and for the foreseeable 10 to 15s of millions of years, the plates are going to stay like this, and so that kind of has some control on circulation.
Is there one of those in the South Pole?
Yeah, so Squall this is a great website. You can also do the southern hemisphere, and they actually show you the latest available analysis. And then, well, they have two different things. They have analysis that shows you what's happening right now, and then they have predictions. So yeah, there's another, you can see this for the South Pole as well. And you know, temperatures, this is the time of year when temperatures changing quite a bit just due to solar changes in solar radiation, because we're moving into the fall season for us, spring season in the southern hemisphere. And so that's a time when temperatures are starting to fluctuate more because solar radiation is changing more drastically. Yeah. So anyways, this is a great website if you have any interest in the jet stream and for longer term weather prediction stuff. This is a pretty good site. I guess I can put this in the chat as well. Yeah, I'll do that in a minute. Okay. All right. So for this week, let's get into. We're going to revisit soil chemistry a little bit, and we'll start with some basic stuff today. And then Wednesday and Friday we'll move more into nutrient management in a more anthropocentric way. And it's just always it's important to remember, even though we're going to talk a lot about anthropogenic relationships between soil and humans. You know, soil is important to almost every ecosystem on Earth. So even though we may focus on agriculture a little bit these next couple of weeks, I'll try to always remind us that these things also apply to ecosystems that aren't intensively managed by humans. It just, in those ecosystems, you know, like you don't have a plowed horizon in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, if you know, as long as there's been no slash and burn, because the soil's never been plowed. So we always want to keep those two contexts in mind, and if we focus on one a little bit more, we don't want to ignore the other. So we're going to look at two basic questions: how are chemicals stored and released from the soil, and then what determines the availability of acids in the soil, because it turns out that soil pH is really important for the overall chemistry of the soil. And so in a natural ecosystem or a managed ecosystem, knowing the pH of the soil is important, because that actually controls to a large degree how available certain nutrients are for biological activity. And so we'll do a review of that as well. So when we think of nutrients, we think of things that are important for life. And typically, because plants make up a lot of the biomass in any given area of soil, a lot of this tends to be focused on plants, but plants are, remember, they're the base of the food chain in soil, so microorganisms interact with them all the way up to, you know, the largest animals that may eat the above ground part of plants. And so when we talk about nutrients, there's a couple of different terms we talk about in soil. We have macronutrients, and macronutrients basically are defined by their concentration. So a macronutrient is something that's greater than 1,000 milligrams per kilogram, or 1 part per thousand. And a micronutrient is less than that. Okay, so just, you know, and that's somewhat arbitrary, but you know, for all classifications, you know, we've seen a lot of these over the course of this class. We kind of have to make some arbitrary cutoffs just so that the terminology is easier to use. So when we look at the sort of nutrient tree, we have macronutrients, we have micronutrients, and with macronutrients, there are multiple sources of macronutrients, and we'll get to this as a little bit of a review in a minute. And I've related this to you before, I think recently, a conversation I had with a local farmer, and we were talking about the importance of carbon in the soil. And it became apparent to me during the conversation that this person actually thought that plants got carbon from the soil, right? Carbon's incredibly important in soil for a whole bunch of reasons, but it's not important because plants extract carbon from humus in the soil. Essentially, 100% of the carbon that is in a plant comes from the atmosphere. And it's just the process by which plants get carbon into their system. And so carbon, and to some degree oxygen, at least O2 as a gas, actually comes from the atmosphere. Even though carbon is in the soil, oxygen of course is in the soil. Plants well, plants in particular don't get their carbon and oxygen from the soil. There are certainly a lot of other organisms that get carbon from eating things in the soil, largely plant material. But oxygen is the same too. Most oxygen that's actually used for things like respiration is from oxygen gas. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to have pore space in soils, because you actually need to have air in the soil, because there are things that are extracting the oxygen from that air. Most micronutrients are actually from the soil. But we have these two different sources for nutrients. And then when we look at, when we can further break these things down into sort of more chemical basis, where the nutrients we can divide into cations versus anions. And so the major things, the major macronutrients are potassium, calcium, magnesium, and nitrogen. The major macronutrients that are going to be as cations. The other macronutrients that actually typically occur as anions, anionic molecules, so that means they have a negative charge, are phosphorus, sulfur, and actually nitrogen. Nitrogen can be present either as an anion complex, if you've got nitrogen combined with oxygen, or nitrogen can also be available as a cationic complex. If you bond nitrogen with hydrogen, that actually is got a +1 charge. Okay. With micronutrients, like we said, they almost all come from the soil. And again, we can divide them to 2 categories. For the anions, we have molybdenum, chlorine, boron, which is kind of interesting because boron's not very abundant, in the universe in general. But it is important for some aspects of plant growth. And then as cations, we have cobalt, iron, manganese, zinc, and copper. These are all metallic elements in the periodic table. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I want you guys to have a little bit of time to think about a few things. So we've got an assignment for you to do today in class. I'll put you into breakout rooms in just a minute. For the assignment, what you're going to do is, there we go. Yeah, so what you're going to do in your breakout rooms is this. The first thing is I've got some questions for you to answer. So when we think about how plants get nutrients, it's important to think a little bit about where nutrients are stored on Earth. And so there are 2 tables here. The first table we've seen a long time ago. This is the average abundance of what we call major elements in Earth's crust, right? So the crust is where we live when we think of the different layers of the Earth. We live on the crust, the outermost part of the Earth. On the other hand, this is from chapter 10. These are both from the Franzmeier book. And this is the average composition of a mineral soil. And so what I want you to think about is what is the difference between the average crust and the average soil? And you'll see there's some things same, some things are different. And I also, the second question I want you to discuss is what elements are most critical for life and from where do they come? So this little PowerPoint, I put this up under an assignment today on Moodle, so you can download this PowerPoint and talk about it. You can type in some notes on it or whatever, but when we come back to discuss things as a class, I want you guys to be able to talk and think about these 2 questions. The next thing I want you to do is there are 2 important cycles we mentioned a little bit last week. We didn't have time to talk about them, but they're really important when we think about nutrients. And the first one's the carbon cycle. And I'm kind of assuming that you guys are all familiar with the carbon cycle. It's a pretty common thing to talk about in a variety of different classes. So I want you, again, in your group, I'll put you in 3 groups probably. I want you to sketch the carbon cycle. And there's a bunch of ways you can do this in PowerPoint. You can use tools, you can draw it. If you find a really good carbon cycle that you can talk through, that's important, that you can annotate, that's fine. Find a pre-drawn picture if you'd rather do that. And then you can make your own annotations as a group and just save that on here. If you do decide to find a carbon cycle that someone else has already drawn to start off with, make sure you just copy and paste the URL for the web source by the diagram. So we got the source with the diagram. And then finally, the second cycle that I find probably people aren't quite as familiar with is the nitrogen cycle. And maybe in a biology class you talk about this, but typically this is a cycle that's not talked about as much as a carbon cycle. And so for this diagram, what I want you to do is you can look up online or in a textbook what these 5 processes are. And then I want you to number these blanks, these blank ovals, with the numbers that correspond to the appropriate process. Okay. So you've got 3 simple things to do. I think probably what I'll do is we'll start off here Wednesday. So I'm going to put you into groups and then give you the rest of class time to work on this. And you should be able to get done with most of this in the next 15 minutes. and then you can, when you're done, you can upload these to the assignment site. And we'll come back and we'll start on these Wednesday. We'll just talk through each one of these on Wednesday, and then that will get us started for the day. And we'll finish, well, we'll get deeper into some soil chemistry and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm going to put you in your breakout. I'll put you in breakout rooms. And then as soon as I do that, you guys are on your own for the rest of class today. I'll stay on Moodle, so if you have any questions, you can jump on and ask me a question. But does it seem clear to everybody what you're doing? Comparing tables of chemistry briefly, reviewing the carbon cycle, and then reviewing or kind of introducing yourself to the nitrogen cycle.
Ben, I have a quick question.
Yep.
Do you want us to write, like, for the first slide, do you just want us to write in the speaker notes on the slide, or would you like us to submit a different Word doc?
No, yeah, do put everything on the PowerPoint. Yeah, minimize what you submit. Yeah, absolutely. You can just do it. Remember, speaker notes, if you've never done that, if you just go to the bottom of the slide, you can pull that bottom up and then you can start typing notes here. Yeah, so you can just put the notes in there. So you just upload. And if you just want to upload one PowerPoint for the group, that's fine too. Just make sure you put your names on, so I know that everyone did it. Does that work? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms, and then, like I said, I'll stay on until 11:30 or so. But in case you have questions, but otherwise, we'll just start on this on Wednesday. Okay.